Hello, I am Professor Gurpreet Dhillon, and today we will be discussing the concept of interpretation and meaning. Before we begin, let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever been in an argument where both people were convinced they were right because they interpreted the same words differently? Or perhaps you've watched a movie, read a novel, or even looked at a painting, and someone else saw something completely different from what you saw. How is that possible? If the words are the same, if the painting is the same, if the facts are the same, why do meanings differ? Today we are exploring one of the deepest questions in philosophy: interpretation and meaning. It's a topic that sits at the intersection of philosophy, linguistics, literature, psychology, and even artificial intelligence. More importantly, it's something we practice every single day without even realizing it. Imagine you're reading a text message that simply says, "Fine." What does it mean? Is the person genuinely fine? Are they angry, sarcastic, disappointed? Without context, it's almost impossible to know. This tiny example illustrates a profound philosophical insight. Meaning isn't just in the words, it depends on interpretation. Interpretation is the process of making sense of signs, symbols, language, actions, and experiences. Meaning is what emerges from that process. The fascinating question is this: is meaning already there, waiting to be discovered, or do we create it ourselves? For centuries, philosophers have offered very different answers. The philosophical study of interpretation is called hermeneutics. The word comes from Hermes, the messenger of the Greek gods. Like any messenger, Hermes had to communicate meaning, but messages can easily be misunderstood or distorted. Originally, hermeneutics focused on interpreting sacred texts such as the Bible. The goal was straightforward: uncover the author's, or perhaps God's, intended meaning. But during the 19th century, the German philosopher Friedrich Schleiermacher expanded hermeneutics beyond religious texts. He argued that interpretation isn't simply about decoding words. It's about understanding the whole person behind them. One of his most influential ideas is something called the hermeneutic circle. Suppose you're reading a novel. You can't fully understand a single chapter until you've read the entire book. But you also can't understand the whole book without understanding its chapters. In other words, understanding moves constantly between the parts and the whole. We don't start with complete knowledge. Instead, understanding gradually develops through this circular process. And perhaps more importantly, Schleiermacher recognized something many of us overlook. We never approach a text with an empty mind. We all bring assumptions, expectations, experiences, and cultural backgrounds. Interpretation is never completely neutral. Another philosopher, Dilthey, took this even further. He distinguished between two very different ways of studying the world. Natural sciences explain phenomena. Human sciences understand them. Think about the difference. A physicist explains why an apple falls from a tree using gravity. But if you're trying to understand why someone wrote a poem, joined a political movement, or fell in love, explanation alone isn't enough. You have to understand human intentions, emotions, history, and lived experience. Dilthey called this Verstehen, or understanding. Then came one of the 20th century's most influential philosophers, Martin Heidegger. He completely transformed hermeneutics. For Heidegger, interpretation isn't something we occasionally do. It's simply how humans exist. Before we ever begin consciously interpreting the world, we're already immersed in it. We're born into languages we didn't invent, cultures we didn't choose, histories we didn't create. He called this condition being thrown into the world. Everything we understand is shaped by this background. In other words, interpretation isn't an optional activity. It's the very structure of human existence. Heidegger's student Hans-Georg Gadamer developed these ideas further. He introduced one of the most beautiful concepts in philosophy: the fusion of horizons. Imagine reading Plato today. You live in the 21st century. Plato lived over 2000 years ago. Your worldview is different from his. His historical horizon and yours are not the same. According to Gadamer, genuine understanding doesn't require completely recovering Plato's original intentions, which may actually be impossible. Instead, understanding occurs when your horizon and Plato's horizon interact. Each changes the other. Reading isn't simply recovering old meaning, it's creating new understanding through dialogue across history. This explains why classic books never stop being relevant. Every generation discovers something new because every generation brings a different horizon. But not everyone agreed. The philosopher Paul Ricoeur argued that interpretation requires both trust and suspicion. Sometimes texts reveal truth, sometimes they conceal it. Think about political speeches, advertisements, even social media posts. What appears on the surface may hide deeper motives. Ricoeur believed good interpretation sometimes means asking difficult questions. What assumptions lie beneath these words? Whose interests do they serve? What remains unsaid? Interpretation therefore becomes not only understanding but also critical reflection. Meanwhile, a very different philosophical tradition was developing in Britain. Its leading figure was Ludwig Wittgenstein. His central insight was surprisingly simple. Meaning is use. Consider the word bank. Depending on the situation, it might refer to a financial institution or the side of a river. The word itself doesn't contain fixed meaning. Its meaning comes from how people use it. Wittgenstein called these contexts language games. Each game has its own rules. If someone says checkmate during a chess match, everyone understands. If they shout checkmate during a football game, confusion follows. Meaning depends on shared practices, not private mental images, not hidden essences, but public social activity. These linguistic ideas inspired another important thinker, Ferdinand de Saussure, often called the father of modern linguistics. Saussure argued that language is a system of signs. Each sign has two parts, a signifier, the sound or written word, and a signified, the concept it represents. What's fascinating is that the connection between them is largely arbitrary. There's nothing naturally dog-like about the word dog. French speakers say chien, Spanish speakers say perro, German speakers say Hund. Meaning doesn't arise because words resemble reality. It arises because language is a structured system of differences. A word means what it does largely because it isn't another word. This insight inspired structuralism and eventually post-structuralism. Perhaps the most famous figure here is Jacques Derrida. Derrida challenged the very idea that meaning could ever be fully fixed. He introduced the concept of différance, a deliberately invented French word suggesting both difference and deferral. His point was that every word refers to other words. Definitions require more definitions. Meaning is constantly postponed. Think about looking up a word in a dictionary. Each definition contains additional words that themselves require definition. The process never truly ends. For Derrida, language contains endless layers of interpretation. There is no final stopping point. Meaning is always in motion. Not surprisingly, these ideas transformed literary criticism. Traditional critics often searched for what the author intended, but thinkers like Roland Barthes famously declared the death of the author. Once a book is published, he argued, readers create meaning. The author's intentions no longer have complete authority. Imagine Shakespeare. Did he anticipate every modern interpretation of Hamlet? Probably not. Yet those interpretations continue to generate valuable insights. Meaning becomes something produced through the encounter between reader and text. This perspective also appears in art. Consider Picasso's Guernica. An art historian may analyze its historical context. A political scientist may focus on war and violence. A psychologist may explore emotional symbolism. An ordinary viewer may simply feel sadness. Are these interpretations competing, or are they revealing different dimensions of the same work? Interpretation allows multiple layers of meaning to coexist. Today, these questions have become even more important. Artificial intelligence can generate essays, paintings, music, even conversations. Who is the author? Where does meaning come from? If ChatGPT writes a poem, does the poem have meaning because of what the model intended or because readers interpret it? Likewise, algorithms increasingly determine the information we see online. Our digital environment subtly shapes how we interpret reality itself. Deepfakes challenge our ability to distinguish representation from truth. Big data provides enormous quantities of information, but information alone never explains itself. Humans still interpret the patterns. Technology hasn't eliminated interpretation. If anything, it has made interpretation more essential than ever. At this point, you might wonder, if interpretation is always shaped by perspective, does that mean every interpretation is equally valid? Can anything mean anything? Most philosophers would answer no. Although interpretation is flexible, it isn't limitless. Texts constrain interpretation. Evidence matters. History matters. Logic matters. Shared language provides common ground. Gadamer believed dialogue allows us to test and refine interpretations. Wittgenstein emphasized shared language games. Even Derrida didn't claim that interpretations are arbitrary. Rather, meaning remains open while still being disciplined by language and context. Interpretation is creative, but not chaotic. So where does all this leave us? Perhaps with a deeper appreciation of what it means to understand. Every conversation, every book, every scientific theory, every work of art, every historical event, every legal decision, even every personal relationship involves interpretation. Meaning isn't simply extracted from the world like ore from a mine, nor is it merely invented out of thin air. Instead, meaning emerges through an ongoing dialogue between ourselves and the world we inhabit, between past and present, between speaker and listener, between text and reader, between evidence and imagination. Understanding, then, is not a destination, it's a conversation that never truly ends. And perhaps that's exactly what makes being human so remarkable. We are creatures who don't simply experience the world. We are creatures who constantly seek to understand what it means. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.